On this week's GCN Racing News Show, I'll be wrapping up another very busy week of racing. Track, cyclo-cross and a whole bunch of road racing. We've got a brand new rivalry and a brand new climbing sensation in women's racing, a brand new beautiful race in Portugal and the return of Tadej Pogačar today. This week in the world of racing, we learned that there is a new sprint queen in town. Lorena Wiebes moved to a new team this year, and that has freed up Charlotte Kool from her lead-out duties, and she duly beat her old teammate in 2 of the sprint stages at the UAE Tour. More on that later on. We also learned that Cannondale are going to have their work cut out designing national champion bikes for the season. Off the back of Chavez's win in Colombia, Richard Carapaz won the Ecuadorian title at the weekend. However, if Murari Kudus' bike is anything to go by, they're going to do a fantastic job of all of them. And finally, we learnt that there is so much racing on, it's nigh on impossible to watch it all. Oman, UAE, Almería, Murcia, Figueira, the European Track Championships and more cyclo-cross all in the same week. So I'd better crack on. And I'm going to start with the only World Tour race that took place last week, the inaugural UAE Women's Tour. The GC of the 4-day race was always going to be decided on stage 3 up to Jebel Hafit, but to get there with a chance of winning the GC, you had to survive the crosswinds that came before it. Stage 1 always had the threats of crosswinds, even if ultimately everything came back together. The last few kilometres were marred by crashes, but emerging unscathed and past her former teammate was Team DSM's Charlotte Kool. It was a dominant victory, and whilst Wiebes probably launched her sprint a little early, you could take nothing away from Kool's performance there. However, it then later emerged that Wiebes had been involved in one of those crashes with just 3.8 kilometres to go. The effects of that and the energy she used in the subsequent chase had no doubt impaired her final sprint. On to stage 2, and this time the wind really did blow things apart. Of the big-name riders, it was Marta Cavalli who seemed the least at ease, getting dropped almost every time things split. Her team, FDJ, helped limit her losses, but it certainly wasn't ideal. Full of confidence, though, from their Stage 1 win, DSM put in a huge acceleration with the Flamme Rouge just about in sight. But this is where Barbara Gorici really came into her own. She pretty much single-handedly got Wiebes to where she needed to be in the closing few hundred metres. And in the kick to the line, she was back to the Wiebes that we've all been used to seeing over the last couple of years. She'd eventually cross it a couple of lengths clear of Kool. Now, if anyone thought that Stage 3 would be all about that climb to Jebel Hafit, they would be wrong. Crosswinds once again played their part, with Cavalli once again on the wrong side of splits, along with the likes of Liana Lippert of Team Movistar. Trek Segafredo were the team doing a lot of the damage, but when they came to the climb, they bided their time. Until just under 8 kilometres to go, where 21-year-old Gaia Riolini hit the front. 1 kilometre later, only 6 riders were left at the front, and by the time they got to 5 Ks to go, only 2 riders remained. Riolini, along with her teammate Elisa Longo Borghini. It was an absolutely incredible effort by the young Italian, who was enjoying herself so much, she even started laughing at one point on the very steep climb, probably in disbelief at what she was achieving there. Now, as the two rode off into the distance, the only question that remained was who would be given the win. And I think most of us watching were a little disappointed that Riolini wasn't given the win by her team. She crossed the line hand in hand with Longo Borghini, but in second place. And the reason for that disappointment was because Longo Borghini has already won so much in her long career, whilst Riolini has yet to take her first pro win. I'm sure it will come sooner rather than later, but it felt like the perfect opportunity to gift a young teammate the win, a gesture that I'm sure will be paid back in spades over the rest of this season. However, the Trek team decided otherwise, and it would be Longo Borghini who added 2 more wins to her palmares, the stage win there, and 1 day later, the general classification. Let me know what you think. If you were driving that Trek Segafredo team car on the day, what would your team orders have been? Let me know in the comments section down below. Either way, it was a dominant performance by both of them. Third place Silvia Persico finished over a minute down on that pair. But before you decide, here's what Longo Borghini had to say after the stage.
We owe a lot to Gaia Riolini. She was, for me, the most valuable player of the day because she was just incredible. She was setting a hard pace, and all in a sudden we were alone, and we were like, okay, we just need to go this pace together and celebrate together. Eventually, me and Gaia wanted her to win the stage, and me to get second and the jersey, but then we did some calculation and the team director decided to do this way. She's really enthusiastic and she was really into this game, and at some point she was like, I want to cry, but she said it in the South Italian dialect, so I was just laughing a lot. She's an incredible bike rider, and I'm looking forward to give this victory back to her.
Brilliant stuff from both of them. And as a consolation prize, Rialini, you are this week's Rider of the Week. On stage 4 then, and with one sprint win apiece, this was the final showdown between Wiebes and Kool. It was a pretty scrappy final kilometre, I've got to say, with both of them struggling to get into good position. Wiebes looked to have made the best of it, but ended up having to launch her sprint too early. Now, in the past, she has often got away with a couple of mistakes in the lead into the line because of her incredible power, but on this occasion, she didn't. Kool, who had to get through a lot of traffic to even start her sprint, managed to find clean air and had more than enough power and speed to come past Wiebes, who would in the end have to settle for 3rd place on the day, having already been passed by Chiara Consonni before the line. So, 2-1 to Kool as things stand, and that, I think, is very good news for the rest of this season. It's been pretty amazing to see just how dominant Wiebes has been in recent years, but it's also nice to see her have a little competition at this point. It clearly meant a lot to Kool and her team because this was their reaction just after the finish.
She came out of the slipstream of Lorena Wiebes.
Absolutely brilliant stuff. The Women's World Tour, incidentally, will resume at Omloop Het Nieuwsblad in just under 2 weeks' time. I will move on now, though, to the inaugural Figueira Classic race from Portugal, and this has got to be one of the most beautiful roads I have ever seen. That's got to be on the bucket list as a place to ride at some point. The race itself was an attritional one, with a strong group already out front by the time live coverage started. Amongst that group was Murari Kudus, who was later called back by EF to work on the front of the next group on the road that contained their 2 sprinters, Marijn van den Berg and Magnus Kort. And it looked like that tactic might work out for them. They brought the remainder of the front group back, and then they managed to keep it together for a small group sprint, but then this happened.
Here we go. It looks to me like Casper Pedersen is ready to try and take up his wheel as well. Van den Berg is open. Pedersen off to one side. Rui Costa through the middle. Can they hang on? Pedersen! Casper Pedersen has come off the back wheel of that EF Education train.
So in what was a headwind sprint, Van den Berg not only found himself on the front a little too early, but also, as former lead-out rider Greg Henderson pointed out on Twitter, he went down the middle of the road, which opened himself up to his rivals on both sides. A lesson from a master there for anyone that ever sprints at the end of a race. Hug the side of the road so that people can only pass on one side, and make sure that the side you leave open is not protecting them from the wind. Either way, a great win there by Casper Pedersen of Soudal Quickstep, and his first win since Paris Tours back in 2020. I've got to say, I thought it was a really good race. I hope it continues again next year. 2 other one-day races were on in Spain at the weekend, the Clásica de Almería and the Tour of Murcia. The latter finished up an incredibly narrow and twisty road. It was absolutely bonkers, if I'm completely honest. A group of around 60 riders hit the foot of it, and it was UAE who set a strong tempo, trying to set up Matteo Trentin for the win. He, though, would have to settle for 5th, just in front of a teammate that had done much of that work, Tim Wellens. The finish itself was actually quite hard to decipher initially due to the camera shots that we basically didn't get, but Ben Turner just managed to get around Simon Clark to take his first ever pro win. With a corner just before the finish line, though, and then one just after it, there wasn't really any opportunity for Ben Turner to actually celebrate that win. He just kind of crossed the line and vaguely changed his facial expression. Really looking forward, though, to seeing how Turner does at the upcoming Spring Classics after such a strong showing last year. He'll soon be up there contesting for the win, I have no doubt. In Almería, we had the usual sprint finish despite a nervous day due to the wind, and it was a brilliant first win for the Q36.5 team. Matteo Moschetti perfectly timed his sprint to take a convincing win there. Arnaud Delis and Lotto Destiny had been looking good in the final kilometres, but unfortunately faded, which left Delis out of position with a lot to do. Second was the best that he could do in the end, and even that was with a clash with Max Walscheid in the last 100 metres. Meanwhile, over in Oman, we saw the return of Mark Cavendish in his first appearance as an Astana rider.
hopefully I'll be dancing with them later, you know.
And I've got to say, for a team with very little experience when it comes to sprints and lead-outs, they did a really good job. Unfortunately, he did find himself then boxed in a little bit and then didn't have the power to get back up to speed, but it was a really strong first showing from the team. Tim Merlier was brought to the front at exactly the right time by his Soudal Quickstep teammates, and he had the power to keep David Decker of Arkea Samsic at bay. Stage 2 was a little too hilly for the sprinters, and it was Cofidis' Jesus Herrada who was the quickest at the finish, getting the better of Maxim van Gils and Diego Ulissi, while on Stage 3, the toughest stage so far of the race, Matteo Jorgensen of Team Movistar took the win in front of a small group. On to the track now, and I firstly have to admit that with all the other racing on last week, I didn't get to watch all the action coming from Grenchen, so I'll leave with a few highlights. Katie Archibald took the 18th, 19th and 20th European titles of her career. Along with Eleanor Barker, she won the final event of the week, the Madison, having already won the Omnium title earlier in the week, as well as being part of the gold medal winning team in the Pursuit Squad too. In the men's team pursuit, GB met Italy in the final, but were no match for them. Italy took the gold medal there with a 3-minute 47-second ride. Harry Lavreyson was back to his winning ways in the sprint and also won the team sprint with the Netherlands. Another member of that team, Jeffrey Hoagland, won the 1 kilometre time trial, whilst the individual pursuits were won by Jonathan Milan and Francisca Brauser. Lotte Kopecky of Belgium took a popular win in the elimination race, whilst Leah Friedrich probably had the most successful week of anyone, taking gold medals in the sprint, team sprint and Karen. Right, I shall now move on to what we've got coming up for you on GCN Plus this week. And by the time you watch this, the second edition of the Clásica Jaén Paraíso interior will already be underway or perhaps even finished. It marked the season debut for Tadej Pogačar of UAE Team Emirates, who will then go on to compete at the Vuelta Andalucía, which runs from Wednesday through to Sunday. That looks set to be the first European race of Egan Bernal's season. He heads up a very strong Ineos Grenadiers lineup, and actually it's a pretty star-studded field throughout. Mas, Turns, Woods, Caruso, Gegenhardt, Landa, Mohoric and Haig are amongst the bigger names attending. There are very few sprinters on the start line though, and for good reason. There is very little chance that any of the 5 stages will end up in a sprint. It is definitely a week for the climbers there in Spain. Where there are a few more sprinters is at the Vuelta Algarve, which also runs from Wednesday through to Sunday. Jakobsen, Kristoff and Mears are all on the provisional start list. Geraint Thomas and Tom Pidcock are there for Ineos, and with Kwiatkowski, Castroviejo, Ganna, Martinez and Arensman completing their lineup, it's probably the team to beat in the general classification. But watch out too for João Almeida and Rui Costa, both of whom are going to be competing on home soil. Stages 2 and 4 will be the first GC shake-ups, finishing atop the Alta de Foya and Alta de Malau respectively, whilst the 5th and final stage will be a 24-kilometre individual time trial. We've also got the 3-day Tour des Alpes Maritimes et du Var starting on Friday. The start list is a long way from being fully confirmed. It looks like a lot of the top French riders will be there, including Pinot, Bardet and Gaudu. Newly crowned national champion of Colombia, Esteban Chavez, will also be there representing EF. Chris Froome, meanwhile, is headed to the Tour de Rwanda, which kicks off on Sunday. We don't have live coverage of the race again this year, I'm afraid, but once again, we'll have daily highlights up for you as soon as we can after each stage. All the races that I've just been mentioning are available to watch in all GCN Plus territories. Don't forget also, the Tour of Oman is also still on. There are summit finishes today, as I've just mentioned, and on the final stage on Wednesday, which will decide the GC. Again, it's highlights only that we'll get up for you as soon as we can. Beyond that, we've also got 2 more cyclo-cross races for you at the weekend, with the Exact Cross on Saturday and the X2O on Sunday, both available everywhere except for Belgium, and more action from the Australian mountain bike champs in the early hours of Sunday morning, available everywhere except for Australia. The big one for us though this weekend is the UCI Esports World Championships on Saturday. This will be the 3rd running of the event, which takes place on Zwift and their new Glasgow course. Hannah Walker and Nathan Guerra will join me right here in the studio to preview and analyse all the action, whilst Manon is heading to the venue in Scotland, where 10 of the male and female riders will be competing. The live show will begin at 1800 GMT, and it's going to be available to watch on both GCN Plus, but also GCN Racing's YouTube channel, free to view. And of course, if you can't catch it live, it will also be available on demand. But we'll also have short highlights for you after the event if you don't manage to watch it live and you don't have loads of time. So there's no excuse not to watch it. On the night, it will be the men's races that come first, followed by the women's. And yes, it's races this year, not just one event each. In a brand new format, the 100 starters in round 1 will be reduced down to 30 for round 2 and just 10 for the third and final round. So it's going to make it incredibly intense for all of the riders, but make great viewing for the rest of us. We'll have a full preview for you later this week on GCN Racing's YouTube channel, which will go through the format in detail and look at the favourites for the win. And finally, the world of cycling is back on Wednesday for the start of a brand new season. On Wednesday, I'm going to be joined by Tom Southern and Ian Field to talk about whether or not pro cycling is more dangerous than it's ever been before. We'll also hear from the likes of Victor Campenaerts and Philippe Gilbert, who give their perspective. So make sure you tune in for that. I'm really looking forward to seeing that one getting going again. Cyclo-cross now, and we saw Fem van Empel race for the first time in the rainbow bands yesterday at the X2O Badkamers Trophy. She was locked in a race-long battle with Ceylin del Carmen Alvarado, but on the final lap she managed to get a gap, a big enough gap, to do a Superman celebration across the finish line. Brilliant stuff. We had a similarly close battle in the men's race, with Laurens Sweeck coming out on top in that one, just 2 seconds in front of Lars van der Haar. The Dutchman had also finished runner-up in the Super Prestige the previous day, which was won by Ellie Isabit, with Alvarado winning the women's. In other news, Rowan Dennis announced on Instagram last week that he's going to retire at the end of this season, which I think shocked me and many other fans of cycling. At just 32, with the Olympic Games in Paris next year, I'd expected him to continue at least through to then, but obviously he has his own reasons as to why he wants to draw his career to a conclusion a little bit earlier. Dennis has so far won 32 races in his pro career, including stages at the Tour de France and the Vuelta a España, as well as the World Time Trial titles that he won in 2018 and 2019. And finally, Ali Wollaston had a successful few days in New Zealand, winning the Under-23 Time Trial and Elite Road Race National Championships. Now, she would have won the Elite Time Trial too, but as the events were separate, she was ineligible for the Elite one. That makes her a triple national champion at the moment, though, having won the Criterium at the end of January. In the men's, Aaron Gates won the time trial, finishing 7 seconds faster than George Bennett, whilst James Oram led a clean sweep of the podium for Team Bolton Equities Black Spoke in the men's road race. Right then, that is all for this week, but I'll be back with you at the same time next week. See you then.